The following is a recording of my article, A Plan of Action, as revised as of October 15th, 2014. We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow men who pervert the Constitution. That's a quote by Abraham Lincoln. In the 238 years since declaring independence from Great Britain, our governments, both local and federal, have chipped away at the foundational principles that limit their power in America. It is time for the people of the Republic to once again stand up and be counted in defense of our rights. After years of petitions, demonstrations, and court actions, our efforts have been spurned and rejected. The electoral system in America today is blatantly corrupt, since our enemies have infiltrated the process and now control the count. Those of us willing to defend freedom and liberty today are shouted down or ignored by the corporate-owned media, which also demonizes us in advance of attacking us. To quote from another of my articles, entitled Declaration of Restoration, April 15, 2014, quote, "We recognize the right of the people to alter or abolish government when it becomes destructive of our rights. But in the case of this republic, we have chosen to restore the framework our founders established, and then strengthen it by amendment, so as to reduce the possibility of such usurpation and despotism in the future. For decades, the republic was plundered by the imposition of the income tax. The deadline of this tyrannical tax was April 15th. Therefore, as an act of defiance to the globalist bankers whose greed and lust for power has brought the American economy to its knees, it is our intent to begin the implementation of the plan to restore lawful government as of that date, turning it from a day of infamy to the second Independence Day. Since the federal government prevented the legitimate secession of the Confederate States of America from the Union by force, it has exercised dominance over these states, as well as the other states of the Union, in contravention of the Constitution that formed, defines the powers of, and limits it. At the conclusion of that conflict, the former states of the Confederacy were placed under federal occupation and required to ratify amendments as a condition of regaining their seats in Congress. Such coercion falls under the principle of duress and cannot be construed to be the act of free will, making all such amendments void and not a part of the Constitution. To remove the usurpation, fraud, and deceit perpetrated against the limitations of the Constitution and restore our limited constitutional government, we hereby seek the restoration of our Constitution as of January 1, 1860, before the commencement of hostilities of the Civil War. The Constitution at this time included the original 13th Amendment. This is not to be construed as the reinstitution of slavery, and Congress is urged to propose amendments to remove all language regarding that institution once the Republic and state representation in the Senate has been restored." Unquote. Since the time of the Civil War, the federal government has been in the grips of corporate foreign interests that incorporated the District of Columbia and others, and over time, through the 14th Amendment, enslaved nearly all Americans to a corporate system ruled through contract law and not the law of nature and nature's God. Since the states in the Convention of 1787 did not grant the government power to circumvent the powers and limitations the Constitution for the United States of America defines and grant to those sworn to uphold it, I submit and believe that this corporation is usurpation and void. Any debt, statutes, court decisions, amendments, treaties, agreements, appointments, and actions of all officials in contravention of their oath to the Republic and the effects since January 1, 1860, both state and federal, are null and void, since they're products of fraud and usurpation. This is a quote from 60 Amjur 2nd 177, late 2nd, Sec 256. Quote, "The general misconception is that any statute passed by legislators bearing the appearance of law constitutes the law of the land. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any statute, to be valid, must be in agreement. It is impossible for both the Constitution and a law violating it to be valid. One must prevail. This is succinctly stated as follows. The general rule is that an unconstitutional statute, though having the form and name of law, is in reality no law, but is wholly void and ineffective for any purpose, since unconstitutionality dates from the time of its enactment and not merely from the date of the decision so branding it. An unconstitutional law, in legal contemplation, is as inoperative as if it had never been passed. Such a statute leaves the question that it purports to settle just as it would be had the statute not been enacted. Since an unconstitutional law is void, the general principle follows that it imposes no duties, confers no rights, creates no office, bestows no power or authority on anyone, affords no protection, and justifies no acts performed under it. A void act cannot be legally consistent with a valid one. An unconstitutional law cannot operate to supersede any existing valid law. Indeed, insofar as a statute runs counter to the fundamental law of the land, it is superseded thereby. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law, and no courts are bound to enforce it." Unquote. Due to the lawless nature of our present political circumstance, prudence dictates that the only avenue that remains for us today is restoring the integrity of our government offices by replacing corrupt officials and reclaiming what has been stolen from us by the corporate United States. We have been complacent for too long and allowed this infiltration of our government and institutions. Isn't it time we correct the course of our ship of state and return it into fair weather and calm seas? We can accomplish a return to our liberty and limited government if we put aside our differences and come together for the common good. Replacing corruption with honor through the constitutional process our founders provided will restore the American Republic to the state that blesses our people and once again becomes a shining example for the world to emulate. The militia, or neighborhood defense teams. Historically, militias have been the collective exercise of the God-given natural right of self-defense. People in the community coming together to defend it against threats, both internal as well as external. The militia was composed of the people themselves, pastors, bakers, mechanics, stockbrokers, tinkers, carpenters, indeed all the members of the community coming together to protect one another from whatever threatened them and their property. From the formation of the initial settlements and for decades following the ratification of the Constitution for the United States of America, it was well understood that attacking the militia was attacking us, something that was incomprehensible. Since the Civil War, the federal government has taken the posture that the independent militias of the states are a threat to its power. Government institutions have worked to undermine the institution of the militia through its power to regulate the militia, as well as promoting curriculum in the public schools that at first merely minimized the role of militias in our society, but today demonizes them as if they're foreign to the community and a threat to it. When the term militia is used today, it provokes fear in many of our people due to the ignorance our government has fostered for generations. It isn't in the interests of arbitrary power for the people to retain the means of defending themselves against it. The militia is a defensive force against arbitrary and tyrannical power. Today, the federal government is no longer even pretending to respect the Constitution and Bill of Rights. The rights and liberties of our people are being trampled in multiple agencies that are not authorized by the Constitution, nor designed to fulfill the only true purpose of legitimate government in America: to secure our rights. Isn't it time that we reinvigorate the militia as intended by our founders and defend what is precious to us? The militia, as referred to in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, is the whole of the people at arms, but more specifically, every able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 45 not holding federal office is a member of the unorganized militia, whether they know it or not. The militia is us, the people, which explains the language in Article 4 of the Bill of Rights. Quote, a well-regulated militia, being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Unquote. The logic of the Second Amendment is that the people are the militia, and our access to arms for the defense of our free state shall not be infringed. The greatest threat to liberty isn't from foreign aggression, but from our own government. Our founders knew this, and made sure we had a defense against it when it became necessary. Considering the level of corruption and the hostility of government for any limitation to their perceived power, it is easy to understand why our government schools, the media owned by globalist corporations and licensed by government, and academia who is dependent upon corporate and government grants for much of their funding and support are hostile to the militia. Step 1. Marshaling the people. The first step to regaining control is to protect our community by exercising your right to bear arms and join with others in your community for your mutual defense. Remember, you are the militia. Organizing the structure of the militia and setting up a command structure should be the first step. Evaluating the skills and aptitude of one another to understand where their talents can be better utilized for enhancing the effectiveness of the whole. Veterans have received thousands of dollars of training by the military and should be utilized to train others in the skills of their former modes of service, taking care that their allegiance is not to the corporations the military serves today. While certainly not required, military leadership should be drawn from experienced combat veterans. All leadership must be drawn from those who are honorable and will adhere to the oath of office, understands the responsibilities and duties associated with the oath, and most importantly, the object of that oath, securing our rights by adhering to the organic Constitution for the United States of America and Bill of Rights, as well as the organic constitution of the state you're inhabiting. Step 2. Setting up an alert system. Having a militia is useless if the people cannot contact them in the event of an attack, so the militia must have an alert system established, allowing members of the community to report activity to them for evaluation, so as to determine if there's a need for deployment and in what strength. There should be a phone number, a secure website, as well as a frequency for radio that is distributed throughout the community. By establishing an alert system, you are enabling the people to report either an attack or some other threat or incident requiring evaluation and possible deployment. Remember, the militia is there to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its members. Therefore, the militia should also assemble and aid one another in the event of storms and other natural disasters, working with the sheriff's office in relief and security efforts. Step 3. Please note, and this isn't in my article, but these steps are not set in stone as 1, 2, 3 to be in order. And step 3 here, as I noted here, and may revise in the future, to remove our consent and compliance is not necessarily in the order of which it should be implemented. However, my logic in putting it as step 3 is that once we arm ourselves and organize and set up that alert system, we are now better prepared to deal with attacks by government. Thereby, when we remove our consent and compliance with their usurpation, they are in less in a position to oppress us and to try to enforce the usurpation upon us. End of insertion here. Once our people are armed and organized, we must stop complying with usurpation by ceasing to pay unlawful taxes and complying with legislation in contravention of the Constitution. The only power government has is what we allow by our compliance. So once we've regained our ability to stand up to government, we must cease complying with usurpation and thereby restore our freedom. I have touched on this topic in my article, Changing the Rule of Law, as well as an article I wrote for law enforcement entitled Between a Rock and a Hard Place, The Dilemma of Law Enforcement in the Age of Globalism. Step 4. Removing Oathbreakers from office. Now that we're refusing to comply with the actions of Oathbreakers in our government, it is time to replace them with loyal Oath Keepers. Each community should have a team tasked with gathering evidence from the public record on each government official that has violated their oath of office. The evidence collected should be presented to a common law grand jury who will determine if the oath was indeed violated, and if so, render an indictment, leading to removal from office and arrest by the sheriff. Only those who have violated their oath by supporting, passing, or enforcing legislation in contravention of their oath, or otherwise attacking the natural rights of the people, should be removed. Faithful servants must stop being surrounded by unfaithful servants and supported in their efforts to perform their sworn duty, securing our rights. From the government closest to the people and then working up the levels to state offices, the criminals that have no regard for oaths, sovereignty, and our rights must be removed. Once a public officer is removed, that officer should be detained until courts of the Republic are restored, after which they will be given due process of law according to the organic constitution of the state wherein they reside and laws in pursuance thereof. Ironically, they will be among the first Americans to receive justice increasingly denied to the people for generations. Should they be acquitted by a jury of their peers in a court of the Republic, their ability to serve in office should be restored. All jail and prison inmates detained for victimless crimes should be summarily released and their records for such crimes expunged in the interest of justice and to make room for the potentially huge influx of prisoners resulting from this action. The principle at work is no victim, no crime, and the state cannot be considered a victim. Once American control is returned to our counties, we must remove the federal agencies from them. Since the federal government is no longer in compliance with the terms of the document creating it, it should have no authority or power within American communities. Once our states have been returned to American control, it will be up to them to deal with their creation. But we, the people, should remove their rebellious creation from our communities until they do, and stop complying and paying for it. The sheriff. The sheriff was meant to be the last wall of protection for the people at the county level. Being elected by the people, he's the highest law officer in the county and charged with securing the rights of the people and their property from threats, both in and out of government. A good sheriff will seek the indictment of officers in government at the county level that violate their oath, forcing their removal from office, including the deputies under his own command as necessary, since his first duty is to help us secure our rights to life, liberty, and property. Violating the oath of office and seeking to alter our form of government through any means other than amendment is a crime. I touch on that topic in more detail in my article, The Duty of Our Oath. If your sheriff does not honor his oath of office, assists outside agencies in attacking our rights, and enforces laws in contravention of the Constitution, he must be the first officer to be replaced. It is the office of sheriff that has the power to marshal the military power of the county through the posse to repel outside threats and remove internal ones. Having a sheriff that is either ignorant of his obligations under the Constitution or contemptuous of it is a grave threat to everything you hold dear. Since he is the highest peace officer in the county, he is the only one with the lawful authority to block other government forces and agencies in their attacks against you. They must all get the permission of his office before proceeding in their action. Even the feds cannot pass lawfully if he says no. Going through him without permission would be an act of war against your authority, since you elect him. When you bear arms, you regain your power. Restoring any government office to constitutional control will be a simple matter of supporting your sheriff in his constitutional duties. Despite what the media portrays, we vastly outnumber the Constitution's enemies. Your right of self-defense came from your Creator, and no one in any government has lawful power to deprive you of that right. Those who attempt to disarm you are usurping the authority of your Creator, not just yours. The same thing applies to your state government. Once enough counties have been restored, it should be a very simple matter, of removing Oathbreakers from the state government. The combined power of the counties, joined in restoring integrity back into government, could not be resisted by any force the state could muster, including federal, if all the states are doing this simultaneously. There would be just too much force being brought to bear. I'm not saying that there will not be resistance, both from a legal as well as a military perspective, but if we're exercising our right of self-defense and focusing on restoring our government, we're not the ones in rebellion. The Oathbreakers are. The actions above include all offices in government where the occupant has violated the oath: executive, legislative, and judicial. The vote across the republic must be returned to a simple paper ballot, marked and tallied by human beings and verifiable when challenged at the precinct level. The corruption in our electoral system has undermined our republic by robbing the people of their voice in government affairs and enabling our enemies to insert their agents in our offices of honor and trust. Isn't it time we restored our voice? Contrary to what many believe, America isn't what our representatives in government think it is. The legislature wasn't intended to be a think tank coming up with ideas for morphing society to the latest trend or fad, or to herd people wherever they deem necessary to better form the world to their liking. People today seem to have the impression that anything the legislature passes is law, that those men and women in the Capitol, both state and federal, can legislate on whatever they consider necessary to govern the people in any manner and for whatever purpose the legislature determines. Such is not the case. In the American Republic, the people determine what powers the legislature has by defining those powers in a constitution, along with any limitations the people determine are necessary to protect those things outside the scope of the political body, such as our unalienable God-given natural rights. It is time to take action that will be effective and long-lasting to remove those officers in our government that have violated their oaths and for whatever personal reason are attempting to circumvent the terms of their oath. Some are actively working with the enemies of the Republic in an effort to undermine and destroy it. Others are lining their pockets with the property of the people, or being extorted or bribed by enemies to support programs or actions in contravention of the Constitution. Whatever their reasons, they are violating the terms of their oath and therefore the conditions of holding office. Once the states have been restored, they will have the authority and support of the people necessary to force the federal government back into its proper place. They can cut off all funds sent to Washington, raise the militia to counter federal usurpation and intimidation of the people, and demand the immediate impeachment and arrest of all oathbreakers still in power at any time. The people and the states will have restored their power with a minimum of bloodshed through constitutional means. It all begins with arming yourself and standing up as an American. That concludes my article, A Plan of Action. And I hope that you will comment and give me your remarks on my blog at publius87.wordpress.com. And may God restore the American Republic.